there was a moment there, and it was a very big growing up moment for me. And I think it has a lot to do with the transition from being bullied to no longer being bullied. And so, first of all, when I was a very small child, I was 5 or 6 years old, my babysitter, Judy Park, she disappeared. And I had a big crush on her. So her disappearing was a big thing in my life. And about 3 months later, they found her, and she'd been killed. And her murder has never been solved. You know, it's one of those things. But Clifford Olson, I'm sure you remember.
Oh, yes.
He took credit for it, I think, because he had a cash for locations program. So he took credit for it, but then it turned out it had nothing to do with him. But this was in my awareness.
That's a crooked man. Eh?
It was crooked. It was broken.
To be a serial killer who will also go to the lengths of confessing to murders he didn't commit.
Well, they were paying him for body locations.
Jesus Christ.
That's a whole other thing. But I grew up with that in my awareness. And so here I was in Edmonton, and one night, and I lived in actually the part that I'd left out is after my dad and I reconciled, he moved to Vancouver and he left me there. So I was still living on my own, but at least now in an apartment. And one night I was walking home. I'd missed my last bus. It's 3 a.m. and I was walking home, and I had to walk about 3 kilometers. And this is in East Edmonton. It's not the safest area in the world. And I'm going up through the alleys because it's longer to go on the lit street. So I just take the alley route. And this car pulls up beside me slowly. And there's a guy in the car doing unacceptable things to himself while watching me as he walked by in the car.
Yeah, fun.
And the first thing I did is I went to my back pocket because it was like routine for me to have a switchblade or a butterfly knife in my. But I had just been out with some friends at a club that had metal detectors, so I didn't have one. So I'm walking down the street, and this guy's beside me, and I'm freaking out. And I've grown up with this awareness, right? Like we all come to that point where you realize life is actually not permanent. And I that was fix-it for me. So I was very aware of this situation. The guy kept circling around a bunch of times. And as I got closer to my house, I didn't want him to see where I lived. I lived on my own. I'm 15 years old, 16 years old. So I go into the school ground behind because it was floodlit like crazy to keep all the druggies out and stuff. So I go into the school ground and I climb up the spiral slide because I figure if I get to the top of the spiral slide, I'm safe. Right. Like there's no way he can get up there without coming up face first, right?
Right.
So I climb up there, floodlit, and plus there's apartment buildings on all sides of me. So there's witnesses, right? Like I'm in the safest possible place I could be at 3 o'clock in the morning. And he pulls into the school parking lot. And he sat there for quite a while, and then he opened his car door. And it's all so vivid to me. Like the car was yellow. That's a long memory to hold on to, but, and he walked across the grass. And as he walked across the grass, I contemplated what was going on. And I made a very clear decision. I'm going to kill him. Like I have no choice. If he comes up the ladder, then I'm going to kick him across the bridge of the nose. And when he falls, I'm going to jump on him and keep jumping until it's over. I'm done. I'm so scared. And he came right to the bottom of the ladder and he put one foot on the ladder, put one hand on the rail, and he looked up to me and he goes, "Are you looking for company?" And I'll save the actual vernacular that I used for him at that moment, but I was unkind. And he turned around, he walked back to his car, and he sat in his car for 3 hours. And I stayed at the top of the slide for 3 hours. I did not come down. And then eventually...
That's a learning moment.
But the weirdest thing is I was never bullied after that, ever again.
What changed?
I was willing to stand up for myself physically. I just...
Yeah, but what do you think changed? Like... You said you weren't bullied. That means you were signaling in a different manner, right?
Yeah.
You see, I saw this in my clients sometimes as a clinician. I would see them integrate their shadow, let's say. And one of the things I really noticed, you can actually see this, by the way, portrayed in the movie The Lion King. It's very interesting because Simba, when he's an adolescent, like a child, an adolescent animated, has a facial expression sort of like this, right? It's like everything's coming in. He's like a deer in the headlights, say. Then he has this initiation experience where he realizes his affinity with his father, and his father has a very commanding visage, a very commanding face, very differently animated. And these, of course, Disney-level animators are bloody geniuses, so they capture these things. And the animators flip Simba's facial configuration at that point so that there's a setness and a harshness to the way that he looks at the world. It's as if he's coming out instead of things coming in, right? He's got a command to him. And I'm wondering if that experience that you had restructured the physiognomy of your facial expression. Posture,
Posture, facial expression, and reaction.
Eye contact.
Yeah. And reaction. Many years ago, and I read this article, and it set the foundation for almost all the work that I do today. And it was like, it influences everything I do. And it was an article about two women who were sexually assaulted in Central Park around about the same time. And this investigative journalist followed them after it happened, their recovery, and what their lives were like afterward. The one woman, they both went through it. And of course, there's a horrible truth about sexual assault, is that once you've been sexually assaulted once, you are significantly more likely to be sexually assaulted again.
Yeah.
And that's because the kind of people who commit those crimes are spineless, wimpy. They go after the weak. And so if
predators.
They're predators. And no, they're not even. They're the wrong. Predator almost is complementary. They're worse. They're scavengers. But
well, that's the parasite element.
Yeah. And so they in any event, they both learned this fact that once you've, because in the clinics, in the shelters, they tell them these things. You have to be careful because now it might happen again. The one woman hears that news, and the meaning she creates is, I am now even more of a victim than I was before.
Yeah.
And she turns to, a prescription and non-prescription medication and suicide attempts, and it ruins her whole life.
Right. So that's the anxiety root.
The other woman, she said, well, why? Why are you attacked the second time?
Yeah.
It's because you're displaying fear.
You bet.
So she went to a self-defense class, and she learned some useful things, like a credit card held in the right way, swiped across the throat, can actually cut it. And keys held between the knuckles are an incredibly effective weapon. And she learned these things.
Yeah.
And she started walking down the street differently. And in one example, she was out with some friends, and they're like, would you like us to walk you to your car? After what happened?
Yeah, right.
And she's
That's
like,
an invitation.
no, I don't want you to walk me to my car. I will walk myself to my car.
Yeah.
And pretty soon her friends were like, would you walk me to my car?
Right.
So she starts a self-defense clinic. It gets franchised, and she, she opens a few of them, and here's the telling moment in the interview. The interviewer says to her, if you could go back in time and prevent your own rape, would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
She says, no. I am significantly more afraid of the woman that I was before it happened than I am of the event itself.
Yeah, right.
And I when I read that, and I thought about what happened.
Those parasitical predatory types, especially with regards to predation on children, is they look for children who are uncertain and easily cowed.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing for everyone watching and listening to know. If you teach your children to be afraid as their fundamental response to the world, you are enabling the people who prey on them, because the people who do that will watch, and they target the children they think they can intimidate into silence. Yeah. So that trembling like a rabbit in the evil serpent eye of the predator, that's a very bad strategy for human beings, because we're not rabbits, and we don't use background camouflage as our defense. Yeah, it's that calling out of aggression that's the right response to predation. Now, it's interesting, that you said that you weren't bullied again after that, eh? Yeah. That's a very interesting transformation.